Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM for Your Consideration. Now, what is for your consideration? Well, first of all, you will have noticed that this video dropped on Friday. That's right, unlike the usual videos that go out on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Now, unlike How to Be a Great GM or How to Be a Great Player, which are instructional, educational videos on how to improve your game, the For Your Consideration videos are basically reviews, thoughts that I might have, adventure creation sessions, looking at games that you can play, maybe even me playing some games. It's just generally stuff that I have found or have come across or am doing which I think you might find entertaining to watch or beneficial to work along with me as I go through processes. So, to kick it off, something that I have been meaning to do for a very long time, and I do apologize to the author of this book that I'm about to talk about because I've had it on my shelf for almost a year, if not more, and have been promising to do this, so now I am doing it. So, without much more fanfare or apologies, I want to introduce you to this book, CreepyPasta, the role-playing game. Now, just look at the cover. I mean, it's terrifying. Already, I'm kind of nervous to open this book. Now, this is a custom-written RPG that looks at the ideas and thoughts and terrors behind your average horror type of situation. It's not Call of Cthulhu. This uses all the dice that you can imagine and does so in a very unique and imaginative way. Now, one of the reasons why CreepyPasta stands out so much for me anyway is that the book is in alignment with the theme. So if I open it up here, I'm going to try and find a page here. So already we've got, and it's burning out because of the camera, but you've got all of these redacted snippets. This is in the opening story, my personal experience writing this book. And there's all these moments where we can't find out anything that's going on. Now, the idea behind the book is that it has got some amazing artwork in it. It's really creepy, really kind of gets you into the mood. And then it's got little things like this. And I'm going to try and do it this way because, no, it's not working. Sorry, this is the first episode of For Your Consideration, so we're still working on the kinks. But in the top corner, just here, that you can't see, it says here, "Do not play this game. Do not play this game." Written into the book. That's kind of freaky. It kind of makes me go, well, now I want to play it, right? But at the same time, it makes me a bit nervous. So the book is beautifully laid out. It's very thematic. The way that the rules are explained, nice and clear. There's lots of examples. If you roll this happens. If this happens, this does, etc., etc. You've got what you would expect. You've got some attribute dice, which you use. They're not handled in the same way, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on how that happens. You should get a copy of the book, but there's little breakaways, there's thoughts, etc. However, as you move through the book, and you can see here the green screen in effect, that's a green block, not a hole in the page and in the universe. But as you work your way through the book, it's nicely laid out. It shows you exactly what to do. It talks about the different abilities that one has, one's character abilities and things. It flows nicely. A lot of times you'll get rule books that are just all over the place and they don't make sense. This, you can see, has been done properly and with a lot of thought towards the player who is going to be creating their character. They've got some lovely little ideas in here: exertion points, reverence points, things that allow you to re-roll dice. They've got exploding dice, so if you're successful you roll again, if you fail you roll again and you deduct numbers. It's quite an elegant little system and something that's different from what you normally associate with the horror genre, which of course is Call of Cthulhu. For example, Call of Cthulhu is big meaty tomes. This isn't a particularly large tome. I'm looking here now. It's 94 pages or so of sheer gold. So carrying on, if I wanted to show you an example of what's happening now. You can see these are scratch marks that are in the book they don't really have anything to do with the story. They look like they've actually been drawn into the book by pen. So they don't look like they've been printed here. They look like they've been actually hand-drawn. They haven't actually been hand-drawn, I hope. But the idea is that there's these little crib notes, these little side notes and things that really start to make you feel as if you're there. And as if this book has been has gone through the mill. Why won't I sleep? Why won't I sleep? Well, that's a good question. One that I'm not entirely sure I want to know the answer to. Again, just lovingly filled with this really creepy artwork. On the back, there's this freaky dog. If my dog looked at me like that, I would be running. And again, what I also like, and I know I might be stressing it too much, is that, yes, I'll see how I can solve this problem. But the text starts to actually swim across the page as if you yourself are going mad. And some of the lines are they're just crazy. They're just in every direction except the direction of normal. Very, very nice, very thematic book. Lots of detail. The book, of course, includes everything that you would expect. Equipment lists plus their costs. You've got adventure. I mean, here's a whole page that's written backwards. I'll have to hold this up to a mirror, I suppose, and get there. That's chapter 7 or 7. Oh, I don't know. It's freaking me out. Yes, so CreepyPasta is a fantastic little game that you can pick up. Head along over to the website that I will link below, because my brain has gone blank as to where one can pick up a copy of this. It's by 26 Letter Publishing. It's a great book, and one that I think is well worth picking up, going to go and find where it is. I'm sure if you Google CreepyPasta, the role-playing game, it will definitely come up because of its, well, just because it's so cool. All right, now traditionally for your consideration would be only one kind of thing, whether it's a review of a role-playing system or whether it's a game that I've played and that I want to mention. And I do have a game that was sponsored to the channel, called Ghost of a Tale, which tells the tale of a mouse trying to escape from this dark and nasty world and claim retribution. I have started playing it, and I have to say that it's a lot of fun. Very thematic, very curious. So watch out for that game review I'll be doing in the next coming weeks, as soon as I get to a point where I feel I can talk a bit more about it, and we'll cover that. However, because today is the inaugural launch of For Your Consideration, I've decided that we'll do a review of a game system. So there was CreepyPasta for you. Check it out. It's really cool. And then, because it's Friday, most likely, hopefully, you've got a game coming up tonight, tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and Sunday night. Well, whatever your role-playing schedule is like, I'm sure that you've got sessions coming up. Now, if you are a GM, that means that you have to have plotted out or planned your next adventure. And sometimes you're sitting there going, I don't know what to do with the guys. I really don't. So in the second half of the video, I will be plotting out an adventure from scratch. Now, I have done this before on the channel where we've focused quite heavily on the whole creation process and that kind of thing. So this is not nearly as, say, heavy as that. If you want it to be, please leave your comments below. I need your feedback on whether you think this is a worthwhile venture or whether it's something that, well, maybe no one should waste their time with. All feedback is valuable, critical or otherwise. And also what you think of the background and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, with the books, what I'll be doing is people who send through books for a review and that kind of thing, I'll ask for the PDF as well, so I can bring up nice pictures and things to demonstrate the points that I make as I go through the book. So, when coming up with an adventure, I'm not going to go through all the minutiae and all the details. We know that it's someone who wants something bad and is having difficulty getting it. Coming up with the idea of who that is and what it is and all those kind of wonderful things can be tricky. So how do you work around that? Well, I like to use, sometimes when I've got a complete block, free association. So I grab a pen and a trusty piece of paper and I go, all right, fine, I'm going to do some free association. This adventure, for example, let's go with, because we've got CreepyPasta, let's go with some kind of horror theme. And let's say, for example, that the horror theme, our campaign setting just happens to be set in a fantasy world. So it's a fantasy world, horror kind of system. That's fine. We can work with that. So the very first thing that we have with a horror system is usually we have some kind of big, bad, nasty creature or thing or spirit or ghost or demon or whatever the case might be. Our players have been journeying across the lands in the past and so have encountered all kinds of things, but we want to give them something slightly different. So how about we have our players come across coming across a corpse. So on my trusty piece of paper, I'm going to write corpse. How or what corpse is it? Well, the idea of the corpse, when you try and turn things on their head, you go, well, traditionally we expect corpses to have been murdered or to have died of a vile plague or to be infected by some kind of zombie virus. Corpses, generally speaking, have got some kind of nastiness to them. So I'm going to turn this corpse on its head, not literally, but I'm going to say that this corpse that they come across is a human corpse, and it's trying to bury itself. Right, so there we have it. The corpse is trying to bury itself. That's something slightly different. We haven't come across that very often. It's not unique, but we haven't come across it very often. Now we plug in the formula. So why is this corpse trying to bury itself, and why is it having difficulty doing it? Why is it trying to bury itself? Well, obviously it wasn't buried, so someone didn't bury it, or perhaps it was buried and then it was exhumed and left. Perhaps it was exhumed or it was forced out of the ground. Now that could be something that's slightly more interesting. An exhumed corpse talks about grave robbers and people looking for something, which is not the horror theme that we want. We want a horrific theme. We want something that is absolutely terrifying. So, what if the corpse was forced out of its grave, forced from grave, by what forced it from its grave? If the corpse was forced from its grave by a power, the power needs to be able to be defeated by our players. That's something that's very important. Unless it's going to become a big bad and it's going to last throughout your entire campaign, we need to have a way in which we can overcome that power. So what if it was forced from the ground because there is something down there that is disrupting the dead? Okay, what's disrupting the dead and why is it disrupting the dead? All right, so it's forced from the ground by, or not by, because something is disrupting the peace of the dead. All right, something is preventing the dead from resting peacefully. Okay, now we've got a couple of spin-off questions that come out of that, because what are the dead going to do now that they've been disrupted? This corpse, in this particular case, is trying to bury itself again. Can these corpses talk back to the players? No, I don't think so. We want to leave that area a grey area. We want to have that sense of foreboding that there is something definitely happening here. There's something creepy going on. Other members of the dead, so some are trying to bury themselves. Some bury partially because they're not very good at it. Some will consume flesh, consume the living. Some will inhabit the living. Some will loiter, perhaps. So by listing what these creatures are going to be doing now that they've been kicked out of their graves, it allows us to modify the adventure or to add to it depending on which way the players go. So if they see this corpse trying to bury itself and they move on, they walk around, they walk away, they leave it to be, the next time they come across somebody, it could just be a woman standing there, and they can see the spirit slowly drifting in and out of her as it inhabits her and causes her intense pain, and then drifts out again, and then comes back again, causing her intense pain. So we reinforce that there is definitely something going on in this area that is causing the dead to rise and not really know what to do, whether that's to bury themselves, consume the living, inhabit the living, torture the living. So this, for me, allows one, torture the living. I'll add that in. This allows you to then have quite a lot of flexibility when you are actually running the adventure. So that's good. So we've got that there. Okay, now we haven't yet got why. Why are the undead being kicked out or being disturbed? There must be something down there. We could go with crypt. Crypt is the stock standard. Oh, in the crypt there's an evil being of ultimate power. No, I'm not too fond of that. We need something else. What is disrupting the dead? This is meant to be a horror, remember? What is disrupting the dead? Who buries the dead? The dead are buried by undertakers, priests bury the dead. This is a fantasy setting. So, and this is part of my process, is I look for any kind of connection. And as I'm looking for the different connections, I'm trying to see where we can go. So we've got these people who bury the dead. What if the manner in which they're burying the dead causes the dead to come back? What if that was the case? Why would that be the case? Why would they do that? Okay, so they're taking something away from the dead. So now these are the recently departed, because they've only just started. So not old corpses, so recent corpses. I'm going to make a note here. Recent corpses. Now, this is a clue that you have to give your players. Your players have to see that these are recent corpses that have been risen. They've only been dead for a couple of days. They're not skeletons. They're not ghosts. Well, maybe they're sort of ghost-like, but they're ghosts of people who have died fairly recently. And again, an easy way to do that is to have them wearing modern-day clothing in terms of the era. So although it's fantasy, that fantasy will have different types of clothing throughout the different periods. The idea here is to make sure that the players are aware. Oh, you can see that they're wearing modern dress. The corpse doesn't look more than a day old. It looks as if it's freshly buried. The body is still distended from gases which haven't yet leaked out because of death. All those kinds of juicy little tidbits you can now throw in to make it a lot more visceral. So then, if there are these people who are doing something to the corpses that are causing the corpses to come back, who are they and what are they doing? Well, a good horror always has some kind of setup. So we've now got corpses doing this sort of stuff, and the players are going to be becoming concerned or worried, and they're going to start looking around. All they're going to see, though, perhaps is a graveyard and an old church or a monastery of some kind. I think what would be more interesting and more terrifying is, so a nearby monastery. I can never remember how to spell monastery. It's monastery. Monastery. Nearby monastery. And the nearby monastery is full of dead or near dead priests. Now I know that I've just scuppered my whole discussion about the priests causing the bodies, the people to do, the undead to rise. By killing them all off, you have the players wandering around this big, large structure, opening doors, and there are dead priests everywhere. Bloody, macabre scenes, priests that have ripped their own heads off. Go as far as you like to go and as far as your players like to go. One or two priests can still be alive, in which case they can then give some kind of clue to our players. Now, what that clue is we need to determine that. Now, some of you who are a little bit sharper can already see where I'm going with this. There is someone who's conducting some kind of vile experiment on the dead, and they used the monastery as their base of operations. The monks hid it, and that's why now the dead have come to avenge by causing the monks to die. That's a fairly straightforward story, and it's a good one to work with so that we can sit and look at that expectation of it's an individual who's torturing the dead, and so there is this punishment happening. We can look at that and say, okay, how do we twist that? How do we change it? How do we make it more terrifying or make it our own? So, assuming that there is this being that is torturing the bodies of the dead before they are buried, and then that has caused this whole ruckus to happen. So the spirits slaying monks in revenge for being mutilated by someone in monastery. Okay, so we've got that sort of idea. Why is the person mutilating, and why, and what can we do to turn on its head? Okay, let's have a look. We want this to be horrific, right? We want this to be truly diabolical. We want our players to go, ooh, no. So, our players are in the monastery. What are they likely to do? They're likely to investigate, not find anything, wonder what the hell is going on. Then a little girl can come into the monastery, scared out of her wits. She's been attacked by one of these spirits. She's from a nearby village, and the village is under attack. Is that too obvious that the villagers are eating the corpses before they get buried? They're taking off the back half of them, so in the coffin they look fine. Is that too obvious? Is it too murky? Maybe we should go back to the idea that this is a psychopath who's busy doing this to the corpses. Perhaps. I think that might make more sense. So this is something that is absolutely part of the process, in my opinion, is you have ideas, you follow them, you look at them, you go, oh, test that, not such a good idea, let's come back, let's claw back. And you can see that this is not planned in any shape, form or fashion. This is literally me spitballing on the fly here. So we have somebody who's mutilating bodies. Why are they mutilating bodies? What are they after? Well, traditionally, people who mutilate bodies are either trying to recreate their own Frankensteinian-like monster, they're wearing the bodies, they're using the bodies for some kind of ritual. What can we do that's slightly different? What if they're using the bodies? What would you use a body for? It could be making a giant flesh golem. That's not really horrific, though, is it? I mean, that's rather dull. All right. So, part of horror is the fact that someone is doing something horrific. How do we make things horrific in this day and age where we've got movies and TV series that show us gore and violence and horror all the time? Well, horror is not necessarily limited only to the dead. It's also psychological horror. So, what if we have a few of the nuns that are in this monastery? Because that's where you get nuns, right? In a monastery. No, it's a nunnery. So, a few of the monks. No. A nunnery is more terrifying. I don't know why. A nunnery. So a convent. Nunnery, convent. I've heard both terms. Convent. Full of dead nuns. All right, so we have a convent that's full of dead nuns, except we meet, or we find, they find, because they're exploring, they're looking, they're being attacked by these strange undead nuns and body corpses and all that kind of stuff. So that's a lot of fun. Then they meet, say, Sister I always want to say Sister Agatha. I don't know why Agatha. It's just a thing. It happens. But let's say Sister Uviolata. Uviolata. And that's from Nuns on the Run, with Robbie Coltrane and Eric Idle, one of my favorite comedies of all time. So Sister Uviolata. And Sister Uviolata knows what's going on. She knows what's going on, but refuses to say why. Okay, I'm having her refuse to say why because I have, I think, worked out why they are mutilating these corpses. And I think it's going to cause the players to pause. So, Sister Uvalata, but refuses to say why. She flees. Nothing like a good chase sequence through a zombie-infested nunnery. She flees and leads to the orphanage. I mean, it's a horror, right? So orphanages, nunneries, convents, it's all... I mean, the only thing I am lacking here is a hospital, and then we're sorted. But there's a reason why she's going to an orphanage. I want people to expect there to be undead orphans. There are, in fact, orphans in perfect health. No, the orphans are not eating the corpses, bits and pieces that the nuns are stealing. I know that's where many of you might have thought of the journey going. We don't want to see children eating bits of adults. I think I've got something that works a little bit better than that. And she reveals, under pressure, that the orphans... I'm jumping ahead. I am jumping ahead. I need to do something first before that happens. Part of horror, part of a good story anyway, in my opinion, is to make the player characters want to help or invest in the NPCs. And part of horror is generally a reversal of attitudes towards an individual. Sometimes it's just pure terror and it's lasts from beginning to end. I think, though, that the orphans beg the PCs to save them and take them home. Orphans will show PCs where nuns are, right? And we'll build a few orphans, we'll give them some names, and they'll really, they'll hold their hands and they'll say, come on, we'll show you where the nasty nuns are. Now, again, savvy players will have already started to go, what the hell is up with these orphans? Why are they so strange? So, a close look / investigate / medicine, depending on what rule system you're using, check, reveals scars on the orphans. Scars on the orphans. Sister Uviolata attacks. Or if the players didn't find the scars on the kids because they weren't bothering to look at the children, they've got to Sister Uviolata's Chamber of Horrors. All right, so the Chamber of Horrors, second page, is Chamber of Horrors. All right, the Chamber of Horrors, let's say, is filled with, and here we give our players what they were expecting: mutant, undead, zombie children. Okay, so they attack, and our PCs have to protect the poor innocent orphans that are helping them from these horrific creature like kids with 3 arms and 2 mouths and multiple eyes, and make it as horrific as you possibly can. Just before Uvialata is killed, slain, defeated, whatever, she reveals the orphanage is a hospital. Ha ha! For children wounded in wars. And that the children who are helping, you see where I'm going with this, helping the PCs are in fact only whole because she stole body parts from corpses to fix them. Horrific. In order for the dead to be put to rest, because remember that's the ultimate goal in the end. In order for that to happen, the players must now decide: do they kill the children? Do they try and settle and kill the undead that are outside? What do they do? This is that horrific moment where they look into the eyes of the kids, and the kids are all standing there looking back absolutely innocent, but there is murder and chaos and carnage going on in the background. Now, that for me is true horror. We also, however, run the risk that the players are now going to feel as if they're in a no-win situation. They can't kill the kids because their conscience says otherwise, but they also can't kill all of the undead that have risen up and taken control. So what to do? Well, quite frankly, the whole idea is, and this is if they've arrested Sister Uvialata, it works even better. So maybe instead of having her as about to be killed, Sister Uvialata gives up. She gives up. She surrenders. Take me prisoner. I have indeed committed a heinous crime. I have restored these poor war orphans back to being normal children by stealing the parts of the dead. They weren't using them. They were just going to rot in the ground. These children are now back being whole and complete. Now our PCs are in a real pickle. However, the children offer to sacrifice themselves to save life. Now that is horrific and tragic, I think. How that plays out is entirely up to the PCs. I do think, though, that perhaps they can work out, and it depends on how rough you want to be on them. If you want them to have some kind of Disney ending, then perhaps all they need to do is slay Sister Uvialata or sacrifice her to the undead, and the undead will feel as if they are appeased. You could have them trying to intercede and speak to the undead and say that their parts are now being used by the orphans for the betterment of humanity. And I clearly left my camera on autofocus, which I shan't do again. You can decide how you now finish off this adventure. I think if this was a module for a convention, the kids would start to rip each other to shreds while the PCs do whatever it is that they're going to be doing. Or the PCs, the children attack the PCs, forcing them to slay them. Whatever the outcome, this is the part where you have to tailor it to your specific group. A lot of players will, at the conclusion of this adventure, feel as if they've been, well, part of something that they had no control over. Traditionally, that's what horror is about. It's about an individual surviving in a horrific event which they had very little to do with and had very little control over, except that they usually slay the demon at the very end. So if you feel that your players would want a more Disney-style ending, a more conclusive ending, perhaps Sister Uvialata is the demon, then once she's slain the children, are all restored back to their original wounded state, but the undead simply pass away. Or again, sacrifice Sister Uvialata to the undead. They find that appeasing and appealing and will return to their graves. So that is, in a nutshell, how I come up with adventures. As I talk my way through them, I think of an interesting opening scenario, and from there I work out who wants what. Now, if we look at the story, Sister Uvialata wants to save orphans by restoring their body parts. She doesn't have any body parts that are just there, so she takes the body parts of the dead, which causes the dead to rise up against her, and everybody else for that very matter. So that's not her story. The players, however, have now got a very interesting story. The players are trying to put the undead back in the ground where they belong, but they're having difficulty doing it because there is this nun who's agitated the undead in the first place, and she has created a moral dilemma. So the moral dilemma here is the difficulty that the players are having in terms of restoring the body. You can decide how difficult the combats are, of course, depending on the system that you're using, but in general, that is, in a nutshell, how to do an adventure. It didn't take very long, I don't think. We're looking at maybe 20 minutes to come up with that idea. I've got all my notes written down here, so I'm good to go and run this adventure almost at any time. Until we meet again, I remind you, CreepyPasta, you know you want to play it, even though you shouldn't. I love CreepyPasta. It's a lot of fun to play with. Anyway, so we've got CreepyPasta. We've got how to create an adventure that's based on CreepyPasta. Next week, we're going to be looking at all sorts of other things. I've got more rule systems that got sent through to me. There's a Wild West system that uses playing cards that's come through. So it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff going on. Your weekends should never be boring, and you should always be inspired. And like I said, there's that game that's going to get played. I want your feedback now. So this is where you get to speak. You get to give us your voice in the comments below. Let us know. Do you think this is something that's of value? Is there something specific that you'd like me to cover in these kinds of videos? Maybe you go, oh, I don't want you to do adventure creation. Rather, let's look at how to do this, or let's look at, I've got a bunch of players coming around and I need to know how to do a snack. Well, I'm not the right person to come to. I'll eat it, but I don't know, and I have no idea how to make it. So leave your comments below and let's see what we can come up with together, perhaps to make for your consideration just that much more appealing and interesting for you, and useful and inspiring to motivate your weekends to be, well, just that much cooler. Anyway, until next time, I wish you and yours the very happiest of weekends.